Hey everybody, I am back with Eugene Cooke, who is a local urban ag hero. He's done some projects with us in Southern California. He's doing all kinds of wonderful stuff in Atlanta, a lot of inner city urban work, and has just been a real groundbreaking, awesome, charming dude who I have the pleasure of knowing, and he's been really turning this food conversation around in ways that are incredibly meaningful. So Eugene, welcome to the summit.
Hey, welcome. Thank you, Pedram. I really appreciate being involved and included. It's always good to see you.
Hey, listen, it's great to see you, and it's even better for me because I get to share you with the world right now. Because you're kind of, man, you're just so busy being out there and doing it that I feel like it's part of my obligation to get guys like you out in front of the world, because look, it's the inner cities where people are suffering the most in terms of these food issues and in terms of being in food deserts where, Twinkies and Doritos and all these types of things that aren't really food are the options that are available to a lot of people. And so I'd love for you to just dive into how you got into this and how you started to integrate the urban ag into your life, because then, the stuff that you're doing now is so exciting. But let's get some backstory on you first.
Wonderful. Yes, I appreciate that. It's important to always have context. Context really forms a lot of things. And as I was preparing for our conversation, I was talking with my wife, Giovanna, and with folks that I work with, and I was realizing that I think I came into it from a very different perspective. I was interviewed by some gentlemen from the Permaculture Action Committee or something of that nature, and they were talking about how they got involved because they saw these problems in the food system. Whereas my involvement came from a relationship of wanting to be able to feed my family. I didn't know anything about GMOs. I didn't know anything about Monsanto. I didn't know anything about food deserts. This is back in like 1999, 1998. I didn't know anything about any of these things. What I knew was that I was becoming a father for the first time. And Samantha said, I'm pregnant. I said, whoa, we're getting ready to have this child. I went out into our backyard. At this time, we were in Southern California in Claremont, right outside of Claremont, Pomona area. And I just looked at the backyard, and everything that my grandmother and grandfather taught me about growing food, they are farmers in Kansas, right? And I would visit them during the summertime, and everything they taught me just rushed back into me. And I went in the backyard and started planting all this food. From strictly the perspective of, I want this woman to be eating the best food possible while she's creating the baby that I helped to create with her. Simple. And then the baby comes, Kush arrives, and as he's a newborn, aside from breast milk, he's sucking on cherry tomatoes that have been grown in the backyard and all this. And then it was the community that called me in. The community of people who came for the baby shower and the community of people who came for different celebrations at the house. They would see all this food growing at the house and say, Eugene, why is all this food growing in your backyard? You know what I mean? You got a store right across the street. And they started urging me to teach them. And from there, I started to get connected with other people who were already doing it, and they really educated me on how serious the food system issues were. But still, this is 2001, 2002. Now, fast forward to 2014, we all are seeing how, not only how serious it is, but also how divine it is that we've been placed in these positions along the way.
Oh yeah, and the mere fact that we are in a position to be able to help and support our neighbors and encourage them to jump on board and grow food with us and share and yard to table recipes is really it's an exciting time because it's a return of community.
Truly, and that's again, so that's where it started for me. It came from that point, and then I kind of backed into the education, the activism, the revolutionary aspects of it. I backed into it. My first and primary thing was, how do I feed my family? Based on the fact that I have this small piece of property here in California, what can I do to maximize it? So that meant planting fruit trees, that meant planting seasonal vegetables, that meant getting rid of the yard and using the irrigation system to grow food. Similar to what you had talked about.
Yeah, well, I didn't know anything about any of this. I mean, at least you, like my grandparents knew some of this stuff, right? At least you were like one generation from Kansas where, you know, you had some memory, some actual memory beyond genetic memory of this stuff. And you know, we're kind of a good example of who is going to be stepping in and taking this world, and our kids are going to be an example of what the future is going to look like. And so, you know, I was kind of uprooted from an agrarian base 2 generations deep. You were 1 generation deep, and I had to go relearn it. I'm a novice, obviously, and I'm just getting into this game. And you've been doing this since the late 90s now, and you get better every day. You get better every year. It's experience, right?
Absolutely. And the thing that really is the teacher is of course the environment, the blessing that I've been able to travel to Kenya, to Jamaica, to Haiti, to do this work. That helps. And then all the people that we meet. Now I'm sitting in Atlanta, Georgia. We've been here growing in Atlanta, Georgia for the last 8 years. And there's people that I work with who are native Georgians who've been here for years, and they understand the forest, they understand the climate. And so to be able to work with them and the plants really gives a great synergy and a fullness and a roundness to what it is we're doing.
Yeah, fantastic. And so when I originally started hanging out with you, we were doing a project that you came in on in Southern California, this orchard that got revamped and all sorts of really cool stuff. And I immediately was like, hey, this guy's a hero. I love him. And so, you know, I've been kind of following your story ever since. And I'd love to hear how you started the urban ag stuff in Atlanta and where it's gone, because some of the conversation we had leading up to the summit about how now you're dealing with these restaurants and how it's revolutionizing the supply chain is incredibly relevant. And I think it's important for everyone here listening to understand that this is really a big part of the future that you're eavesdropping in right now.
Absolutely, truly, and that's really well said, Pedram. Well, what I'll say is that the story for the urban ag work here in Atlanta starts actually in South Central Los Angeles. So my mentor, a gentleman by the name of Adonijah Miyamura L., he started doing this work at Crenshaw High School, and I studied under him for some years, and we started to develop these food forest systems, right? Because in California you can do subtropical fruit trees, you can do all this thing. So we're growing all these subtropical fruit trees with vegetable understories, doing amazing things. And a doctor by the name of Dr. Bill Rulliford, who is a doctor who specializes in diabetes, but more specifically in amputating people when their diabetes gets too far. We were getting ready to do the African marketplace, and he came to the garden, and we prepared him a bag of salad, which was no lettuce in the salad. The base of the salad was collard greens, dandelion greens, and like broccoli greens. And then there was nasturtium flowers and seaweed and all kinds of different wild mints and oreganos and everything in this salad bag. He took the salad bag, ate it, he loved it. He started prescribing this salad bag to his patients. And what he found was these gaping wounds that they had in their feet most of the time began to bleed. And once they began to bleed, he realized, I don't have to amputate this foot because now there's blood flow coming back into this area. So he started prescribing these salads to his patients, and these patients started to regain vitality and life energy, going back to these limbs that were being totally neglected from the harm that we know sugar does. You know, I was blessed by you to be able to watch Origins, and I think that one of the key points in your film is making clear how addictive sugar is, and how if it was treated the same way cocaine was, then there'd be a lot of people behind bars right now for the way that they are promoting it and advertising it and making it, not even just promoting and advertising it, but putting it in every product, whether you want it or you don't want it, and then the debilitating effects on the body. So we've seen all this kind of thing, and that's where it started, our interaction with a doctor, such as yourself, a medical doctor, who started to prescribe the food as medicine. At that time, at the end of my time in Los Angeles with Adonijah, I met a gentleman named Rashid Nuri, who was working with the USDA, who had just finished his work with the USDA. And he did some traveling to Ghana. He came to Atlanta. He said, hey, I think what we should do is start up some small mini urban farms. Are you willing to come and help? I said, absolutely. So I showed up in Atlanta 2007, I believe it was, and we started Truly Living Well natural urban farms. We are a for-profit business. We started with five people, and we worked that for a couple years, and we realized, man, this is very difficult because, again, we were ahead of the curve. People didn't quite understand, why do I need to have this locally grown produce that costs more when I can go to Kroger or I can go to Publix market or whatever and get food. So we were trying to sell to the restaurants. It was working somewhat. Then we decided to transform Truly Living Well into a nonprofit organization based on educating people about the need for local food abundance systems. From there, we were able to receive grants, foundation support. We opened up Wheat Street Gardens, which is the one I think that you might have interviewed somebody else about, where we created a 4-acre mini farm in downtown Atlanta, right across from the historic Martin Luther King Memorial. So it's getting a lot of attention, a lot of support, and from there we were able to get the restaurants interested and make those kind of moves happen. Once Truly Living Well Center for Natural Urban Agriculture got established and strong, I then moved and branched into creating the Good Shepherd Agroecology Center, because I started doing some studying from a man named Pierre Rabhi. And Pierre Rabhi is an Algerian brother who's responsible for coining the term agroecology. And he has run for prime minister in Algeria and different things like that. He's probably in his late 70s now. And when I started understanding the agroecology principles, I said, this is the next step. This takes urban agriculture and blends it with the environmental movement and all the ecologists and people who are concerned in that way, and say, how do we do both? How do we produce food locally and support the environment that is being attacked by our urban lifestyle? So that's where we are now, is Good Shepherd Agroecology Center.
One of the things that you had mentioned as we were kind of catching up a week or so ago was that, you can grow all this wonderful food and spend, an entire morning at the farmer's market and make a certain amount of money. Or you can find a restaurant that'll come in and actually give you more money because they love your story. And you're cutting out all these middlemen, so it works for the restaurant and it works for you. How is that supply chain finally starting to line up and fire in sync? Because once I feel that once that starts happening more and more across the country, and the demand is there, because people are going to eat at restaurants, and if the demand is there for the supply chain to bring in goodness through guys like you, it will revolutionize how we do food very quickly.
Yeah, and I completely agree. So our story is really rather interesting because specifically with the Agroecology Center, one of my partners in the agricultural movement, her name is Nicole Blue. She was a server at a restaurant here in Atlanta when she was younger. And by just keeping relationships are everything. She kept the relationships, and one of the young men that she knew there who was a chef is now a chef in another restaurant, Empire State South. And she made contact with him again, and his name is George, and he said, hey, bring your produce by, let's see what's going on. We brought the produce by, and good food sells itself, so it was kind of automatic. But what we noticed is that since we know that her introduction into the food movement came as a server in a restaurant or working in the kitchen and doing prep work in a restaurant, how many other people in these restaurants have an interest in food? So we go to the restaurants now and we speak with the front of house staff, right? The servers, the prep people. Well, of course, we speak with the chefs, but more importantly, we speak with the people who are interfacing directly with the client and say, hey, you're the ones who are serving this food, so we'll sit down and we'll talk. Empire State South is one of the restaurants that invited us to come and talk with their front of house staff, and then they chose on their own to come and volunteer at the farm. Now, when these folks who are in Midtown Atlanta serving up amazing cuisine to very shrewd foodies, they come all the way down to Southwest Atlanta, down to the hood and working on the farm, it brings a closure to the circle of their experience. And now when they go to work the next day and they're serving this food and they say, yes, this is local food, it's local arugula or local okra, they know the experience they had. So when the person at the table says, well, can you tell me more about the farm? They can say, yes, I volunteered there. This is what it looks like. They have well water running. They have this many volunteer days coming through. So we've started to, similar to what's happened between you and I, Pedram, just focus on the relationships. If we can get the front of house people to come and volunteer and have that experience, then they are always going to be connected with chefs. And they're going to be more educated when they speak to the clients, which makes their job better. You know, it gives them security because the chef goes, whoa, you took your time to go volunteer on that farm? Wow. And now you're speaking to the clientele in a way that lifts everybody. So what we're looking for in this system is investing a little bit of the extra time that it takes to lift everybody. Educate the people who have direct contact with the clientele, and then they can support these chefs who are spending long hours in the kitchen doing this amazing artistry. But how much easier is their artistry when the food is bringing with it abundant flavor? Right? Instead of getting food that looks pretty but is depleted in nutrients so that its flavor is not strong, so then they got to work extra hard to make it jump on the plate. When we bring them daikon radishes, or we bring them Malabar spinach or candy roaster squash that have been grown in an agricultural system where the soil is vital, the flavor of the food, they don't even have to touch it. They just have to make it presentable. And it makes their job easier. So how do we lift everybody's experience and give them shine? That's really what we're doing.
Yeah, and there's something so special about having a stake in the food that you're now representing and serving. I mean, getting your hands in the dirt and being like, look, man, I was actually working on these radishes last week, and you can just see the sparkle in the server's eyes, I can imagine, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So then that story can be told by interns that we're working with at Georgia State when they say, well, you know, who do we need to talk to in the food movement? Yeah, you can interview me, but how about I direct you to go interview the chef or the server at this restaurant? Now the story becomes it has a lot more depth and richness. And then if they can go interview a medical doctor, or they can interview a midwife, the story just gets richer and richer because food is going through everything. Minister Louis Farrakhan was in Jamaica, I guess 2 weeks ago, and he was speaking to the Jamaican people and saying, look, it's time for us to get back into the agriculture. We need to get back into agriculture. And he was saying how anytime he brings that up, a certain generation of the Jamaican people say, oh, no, me not want nothing to do with farming, because farming, you know, I did that and I chopped banana for the white man and it didn't work out. And he said, but prostitutes eat, doctors eat, lawyers eat, Rastas eat, Christians eat, Muslims eat. He said, people say they want to be a doctor or a lawyer, but the doctor eats. Everyone eats. So how is it that we fill out the conversation? We fill it out by making sure that everyone is getting quality food. And when they know where it comes from and they have a direct connection with the farmer, it's a little more investment for us on our time, but it makes more sense in the long run.
Well, that's, you know, so here's a piece of this, right? It's like we're talking about all these multiple touch points and how they can make the food story more relevant. So here you are, right? You grew up in Southern California. You know, you're a good-looking urban dude who, you know, speaks very well and is articulate, and, you know, you're out there with your hands in the dirt. And I think that there's this frame of reference that people go, oh, well, that's for the farmers, you know, that's like, and I can tell you that this comes down culturally. Like, I'm from the Middle East. I know a lot of people that are Chinese, you know, people that come from former agrarian societies, right, where they're pulling the same thing that the, you know, that the Jamaican guy's talking about, where it's like, well, no, farming is for peasants, and we moved all the way here to America so that we could have a better life. Because our parents, you know, moved, you know, did everything they could to get the hell out of that scenario. And it's almost like they bought into this other false promise that untethered them from the land and got the world confused. It's just an interesting paradigm shift, because when you come from a traditional culture, farming is what you try to move away from.
And at what point did that enter into our desire? You know what I mean? Because obviously the traditional cultures that you're speaking of are not hundreds of years old, they're thousands of years old. So for thousands of years, they couldn't have been trying to move away from the land. Otherwise, the cultures wouldn't have the art and the music and the language that they do. So there has to be a point where we started to move away from the land traditionally. What point is that? Most of the time you can trace it back maybe 200-300 years. You know what I mean? There was a gentleman who put up a blog online called How White People Got Made. And it's a white young man who wrote this. And he talked about how the legal term for white people did not arrive on the books until the late 1600s in Virginia, because they were trying to figure out exactly what you talked about. how do we separate landowners from land workers? And so they had this situation where all the first indentured servants that came over to work the land were the Irish, a lot of different Europeans, right? And then, of course, they brought in the Africans and enslaved Chinese and all types of different things. And then they started having all these uprisings because you had more laborers of the land than you had landowners, right? So you had just as many poor whites as you had Africans, as you had Chinese, who were land workers but not landowners. So they were getting together and having uprisings. And so the legislation said, oh man, how do we do this? We got to deal with this. And they created the divide and conquer, like always. So then they created the term white and said, okay, you poor white people who also don't own land, we're going to make you feel superior to everybody else by giving you this title that called white. You still don't get any voting rights. You still don't own any land, but we'll allow you to be bounty hunters for any of the other people who run away, any of the runaway slaves. So you have an extra income. You have a job as a white person where you can chase runaway slaves, right? Whether they be Chinese, Native American, or African. So the legal term for white and the legal term for black were based on, we have these landowners over here who said we cannot have uprising from these people who work the land. So we need to divide them up and make them feel like there's gradations of superiority and inferiority. So when we look at that, the idea of wanting to get away from the land was not a majority desire, because there were people who definitely wanted to keep land. They definitely wanted to own land. They saw the value in land. They transmitted that value to their children and still do today. Still do today. Make it very clear that, look, the only wealth is going to come from real estate, land ownership. That is not something that has ever gone away. But yes, culturally, they encouraged certain groups of people, mainly laborers, to say, you don't want to do that work. But they never connected, you don't want to own property. They said, you don't want to do that work. Go rent an apartment in the city and work in the factory. You see what I mean?
That's really, really interesting stuff right there. And it just, yeah, and then go serve food that's been made by some sort of tractor, right? And you have no idea what that food even looks like anymore, because now you're an urban servant inside of, these cities, and you have no connection with the earth at all because we own it. Yeah.
When you say the urban servant, that's not anything that is race specific. That crosses, it's just a class issue.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's just a matter of all of us having to be dependent on a system because we don't have the land to generate our own food. But somebody's really serious about owning land, because whoever's farming on tractors, to farm on a tractor, you got to have 500 acres at least. Otherwise, it's not even feasible. So if you're talking about 500 acres, there are definitely families and large segments of the community that have made land ownership a priority and have kept it a priority for years and years and years.
That's interesting.
We need to get back to that.
How many acres, or is it half an acre, quarter acre? What can sustain, say, like a family of 4 if you were to like grow for yourself? I'm absolutely clueless about this. I'd love to know. And it obviously depends on where you're at in the country or the world.
Right. A lot of those factors come in, and also like the practices, whether we're using biodynamic practices, permaculture, these kind of different things, agroecological practices. But typically, man, if you had 1/4 of an acre, 4 people, you could do a lot. Wow. A lot. Of course, things like grains, rices and things like that, you're not going to get your rice supply from 1/4 of an acre. So you'll still have to buy certain things or just take them out of your diet. But for like fruit trees and seasonal vegetation, especially living in like Southern California or even Atlanta, some nice zones like that, 1/4 of an acre, you would have surplus of certain crops every year for market, for canning, preserving, selling, whatever.
Okay, so then we're talking about the minimum plot of 500 acres to run a tractor could technically have 2,000 families, right? Was it 500 times 4? 2,000 families times, say, 4 peoples, 8,000 people could live off that land. The question is, those 500 acres, how many people does that feed? And what does that do for the economy? What does that do for the world? What does that do to the quality of the food? And these are big questions, because we've really kind of gone, full bore into that direction. But now that we're in this era where we can we really have to relook at all of this stuff, re-examine all of these things that we're doing, because we're getting sick and the food's not working and things are starting to kind of come unraveled. As we rethink it, like, these types of metrics are really important to understand. I mean, it's a lot of people living on that same plot of land.
Absolutely. And the metrics of how many people are being fed is definitely one thing. The metrics of, I think, as you factored in, I was looking at well.org had the page where they looked at eating conventional versus eating organic, and then factoring in healthcare costs, right?
Yeah.
Once you factor that in, the metrics completely changes, because, I mean, how many of us know somebody in our family, immediate close circumstances, that is being affected by cancer or autism or any of these things that don't need to happen, that have been on the rise like 600% or 20% or 20-fold in the last 20 years? We know there's a direct connection with pesticides, not to mention GMO foods, not to mention the monocropping of the environment and what that does with the petrochemicals and all that. So yes, a new metric is very important. It's time for us to just take the research, because it's out there, give it to some grad students and have them apply it with a focus that we know needs to be illuminated.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this conversation with a bunch of the luminaries in the movie and saying, look, why don't we all just go buy 10,000 acres and then have this central plot of land in the middle that we all work and have, you know, grass-fed cows and goats and all that, and then have, you know, a central food hub that then supports a community of houses all around. And we've been really playing with all these ideas right now, because it's like, well, you know what? The world's our oyster. We can take this into our own hands. We have well water and we have solar power, and we don't have to play that stupid game, right? And the thing is, people just assume that they are stuck in a system, and it's mental slavery more than anything, because it's just ideas, man.
It's just ideas. And imagine the most powerful ideas are what have put us in our positions. You know what I mean? Is that somebody had the idea, as you mentioned, maybe to get out of the country that they were born in. And I'm sure plenty of people looked at the members of your family and were like, are you crazy? You're leaving here? You're going to go to America? What's going to happen? And da-da-da-da-da. Well, who knew Pedram was going to come from that? You know what I mean? And what he was going to do, but it had to be based on these ideas. So when you're speaking about doing the land piece, collective land ownership, or you know, like maybe a land bank or something like that, I think that conversation is really timely, and I am personally developing my skills to be ready for conversations like that, because each person has to play their part. And I'm a farmer, so I'm definitely not in the position to go out and purchase a whole bunch of acreage, because I'm an urban farmer in 2014, where people are barely understanding that it's necessary. I got 3 children, so I'm not making a ton of extra money anywhere. But I do want to continue to have relationship and connection with people who have generated income in other ways, and say, hey, we need skilled people to run these systems.
Right.
You know? So that's where that conversation gets very strong.
Yeah, and that's, you know, and we could just hash this out a little bit here live on a call with, like, you know, hundreds of thousands of people watching right now. Is, you know, if myself and Dave Asprey and Abel James and a bunch of the guys that are in the movie decide, hey, we should do this, and, like, you know, Dave is Bulletproof Smurf and I'm, you know, Movie Smurf, and Abel is Fat, you know, everyone's already got their stuff. Like, if you could be Farmer Smurf,
I love it.
Right? Then we can all donate time and effort and stuff into it. But someone who understands what the hell they're doing should probably have the top-down understanding of what gets harvested, when, and how it works and all that. And so we need a million more Eugenes in this world to get into all of the communities everywhere to help people rally around food again.
And I think that's a really important point, Pedram, because one of the things that I notice as when I get the time, my wife Giovanna, she does a lot of the research, as far as she has a company called Maitu Foods. And what she does with Maitu Foods, Maitu is a East African word for mother. What she does with Maitu Foods is she serves up vegan meals for pregnant mothers and postpartum mothers and their children and families. And that's speaking to all the issues that we know about how these toxins are moving through the placenta and causing all kinds of issues with these children, unborn children. So when she got pregnant 6 years ago, she started thinking, how am I going to make a living staying home, raising this child, and how do I get the best kind of nutrition to other mothers in my situation? And since her husband has this food that I'm growing, she created it like that. So we have people in the movement doing things like that, and we also have other growers. Here in Atlanta, we've been, I think, gifted enough and had enough foresight to start training programs. Truly Living Well, we had a training program, an urban farmer training program. There's another organization called Habesha, and Habesha did an urban garden training program. And then there's young people who've just kind of jumped up on it and started doing their thing. There's a young brother named Nuri who has Urban Sprouts Farms. And he took an abandoned motel, got the property through different ways, like through auctions and things like this, and is now turning it in and transforming it into a food system, right? Using the swimming pools as aquaponics. I mean, it's just a motel that's been abandoned, and now it has all this land around it, has these empty swimming pools, it has these dilapidated buildings, and he's transforming it. So when we say we need 1,000 more of us, please know that we're in the process of training those up.
Oh man, well that is really encouraging, and I need your story out in front of this world, right? Because, you know, a lot of people watching this are like, wow, you know, I don't know where to begin and all this kind of stuff. It's like, man, there's people in every community right now sprouting up. I mean, talk about, you know, sprouting is probably the best term out there, because this is homegrown. This is grass fed. This is, you know, the grassroots type of movement that comes from people saying, look, man, you don't get to say what I eat, right? Right? That's not, you know, that is an inalienable human right. I will eat what came from nature and what my family and my body recognize as food. And you, right? And back off, right? And so this is huge. I mean, you were telling me about a place just down the road that was doing all sorts of mushroom farming in one of these kind of dilapidated factories too. And it's like, you look at like the city of Detroit, and if you could talk about sprouts and mushrooms, I mean, that could be one of the greatest urban ag transformation stories. I mean, this is houses. People have just left. There's entire neighborhoods that are just abandoned, and you could just as easily grow food inside of some of these environments.
Absolutely. And so what's the missing ingredient is probably the work that you're doing as far as the media excitement, the media motivation is really the word I'm looking for. You know, because the organization you're talking about is called Fifth Kingdom, and Fifth Kingdom is growing edible, high protein, nutrient rich mushrooms inside of warehouses and getting them to not only to farmers markets but to top chefs. And we've done some partnerships with them. So when we look at what that does, right, to have mushrooms as a protein source within urban areas that can substitute for the beef and the pork that are being brought in, right? Suddenly you have a nutrient-dense protein source that's being grown in a very short amount of time and in a small space, using basically recycled material, you know, straw, hay, sawdust, things like that, things that are just going to biodegrade anyway. When I was brought to Louisiana, I was brought to New Orleans, I guess it was 2 years ago, to look at some pieces of property in the 9th Ward that had still not been addressed since Katrina. And I'm looking at this rich property, weeds overgrown, and all kinds of small trees have sprouted all through houses and buildings and all of that. And I'm thinking, they wanted me to come up with a plan, so I came up with a plan. This is what we could do. We could do, because you have so much space, we can do, it's wet down there. We could do all types of different wild rices there. We could do all kinds of things. Sunflowers, Jerusalem artichokes, and have all kinds of flour and meals and grains, and then still do seasonal vegetables and fruit trees. So why is it not happening? Why is it not happening? And I think part of it comes back to, like you said, you got to get somebody who can tell the story from an experiential point of view in front of the people. So today I should be out in the field right now, but you say, hey, Eugene, we need to do this interview. This is going to be a symposium that's going to make sense. We're going to get a lot of people involved. The movie looks beautiful. I have to take the time to have this communication with you, because any of those things that you mentioned about being articulate or any of those things, these are gifts that are only useful if they're used to serve humanity, if they're used to serve the community. So here we're in a position where the farmer now has to be the marketing person, and you know what I mean, has to be the spokesperson. Vandana Shiva has proven that. You know, she's started her seed saving, like seeds of freedom, and she's doing this work, but she's also still having to grow and go and be on the lecture circuit and make sure she's publishing articles. We're starting a new world, and to start the new world requires people to be multifaceted in their skills.
That's it. That's it. You know, it's no longer a class thing, right? And I think one of the most significant things I've heard in a long time is that story, that kind of foundational story of how this class nonsense was even established around landholders and people working on the land. Because if we go back, and you know, for those of you who haven't listened to Mark Hyman's interview and kind of what we talked about with sugar, it's like this addiction we now have to sugar all originated on the system, the plantation system, that was the foundation of slavery and kind of like the darkest history of America and the world. And so we created this really kind of nasty economic model around the agrarian piece, right? And we like created slavery. Now the irony is we're all slaves to the product.
Whoa!
Right? It's like this full circle thing.
And nobody got out of that.
And no one got out.
Nobody got out of that. Nobody escaped it. Not the landowner, not the most corrupt person, is still a sugar addict.
Yeah. Yeah.
And has to bury their wife or their children or watch them suffer through all kinds of different diseases and all of that kind of stuff. So when we talk about karma, when we talk, you know, people are having these talks about reparations and all this kind of thing, whether or not this is going to happen, there are certain things that are happening. And when you say to the world or to any kind of oppressive system, you're not going to choose what I eat. You know, I'm going to eat what, as you said, what my body and my family recognize as food. Well, then to make that claim comes work, because you can't just make that claim and decide you're not going to plant it, because then who's going to plant it? Otherwise, that's just an empty, you're just selling wolf tickets, as my father would say. You know what I mean? You telling people you're not going to choose what I eat, but you're not willing to grow it. You know, people will come to the farm and say, man, y'all are out here every day. I said, don't you eat every day?
Yeah.
You eat every day.
Where the hell do you think this stuff comes from? Right.
Right. Somebody's going to have to do it.
Well, and how much work, I mean, I've been out there with you on a couple properties now, and I mean, for me, it's just great. It's fun. I'm getting some sun. I'm hanging out. You know, for me, it's like a field trip, because I've spent the last couple decades locked in clinics and stuff like that, you know, outside of the sun, helping people on the other side of that. And if people ate the food that you grew, they probably wouldn't need to come into my clinics in the first place. But, you know, people are like, well, that's just too much work. That's not what I want. It's like, your exercise and your work and your vitamin D and your fresh air are all wrapped into a wonderful day.
Absolutely. And again, it's all a matter of practices, just like with anything else we do. What practices we use to grow are going to determine how strenuous it is on the body. No matter what, it's going to be a lot of work. But composting, companion planting, proper crop rotation, just paying attention to the seasons and being in alignment with it instead of being late and having to do extra work to catch up or fill in the gaps where we weren't paying attention. That's where the agroecology piece really comes in, right? Is to create these food systems where every food system has fruit trees in it, every food system has seasonal vegetables in it, every food system has medicinal and culinary herbs in it. So there's always something to gather from the system. And once that system really gets laid in, as long as there's enough perennials, then it's going to offer up the medicine that you need for that time period. So when something happens, when the ailments come, then you already have your pharmacy at hand.
That's fantastic. And I've seen you work with different medicinal herbs. I've seen you work with, you know, all kinds of different foods and trees and, you know, on the orchards and all that stuff. Two questions. One is water. You know, we're in this era right now where, I mean, I live in a place where there's not even any rainwater capture. I mean, it's just such a backwards society where you have the rainwater go off your roof into the sewer out to the ocean, and not using it for food when we're in a drought. So how, like, I mean, obviously wells are wonderful, but, you know, how do you deal with the water issue? Because it will become one for people who are trying to do all this.
Yes, great question. Of course, we're talking about different scales. and different places. One of the blessings about being here in Atlanta, Georgia, is that we, especially at the Agroecology Center, we do have a well. The USDA for small farmers has a branch of their organization called the NRCS, and that is the National Resource Conservation Society. And what they do is they will fund fencing, wells, and irrigation systems, like 40 to 50% of those systems, they will fund that for small farmers. Wow. So you put up some of the money up front, they'll come out and dig the well. Once everything goes through, passes inspection, they refund you 50% of the money. So that's something as a real tangible basic for people who are property owners that you can do nationwide. The other thing is planting trees. Oftentimes we misunderstand the systems that we live in. We live in a living system, and it's trees that bring the weather. People think trees are the things sucking up the water. It's trees that bring the water, right? The respiration of trees causes humidity in areas, causes wind to gather in areas, causes weather patterns to change. So the quickest way to create a microclimate is to plant a bunch of trees. In California, what we were planting was the paulownia tree. The paulownia tree is a fast-growing tree from China that, when it's young, has a very large leaf mass, and then it starts to drop those leaves and send up a big, tall canopy that immediately changes the temperature by dropping the radiant heat that's going onto bare soil, right? So once we start to create these canopy systems, then underneath your canopy system, you can start to plant fruit trees, smaller, shorter, subtropical fruit trees. And you create a new microclimate, and you'll find that in that area, you'll get more humidity and dew, and also more rain in the area where you plant trees.
Wow.
So tree planting is crucial. Fruit tree planting is crucial. You must start gathering rainwater if you're in California and things like that. We got to do that. We just have to do it, even though it's not that much that falls. And then just reallocating the water that you use. I mean, you can always start that way. I've seen in Bill Mollison's permaculture book, he has some designs where, like, the drain of the sink goes directly outside to a pipe that takes it right out to the garden. So you start to use biodegradable soaps for washing your hands and for washing your dishes, and that gray water can go right outside your house and be directed right into your garden or to your fruit orchard, right? Bam. So those types of things, we're going to put in these investments anyway. There's going to have to be some capital investments made in structural adjustments for our life. So it's really a matter of how we're going to allocate the resources that we already have before we start to think about how to generate more water. You know, water is a hard thing to create. Yeah. But we already are using it, you know, so let's use it more wisely.
Well, that's just it. I mean, we're wasting so much of it that just cleaning that up is going to revolutionize so many things before we get another 5-10 billion people on this planet. You know, it's like we got to think this stuff through now so that we have a sustainable base that we can grow from. Because if we go at the current clip, we will have starvation, we will have desertification. I mean, there's all kinds of nasty stuff that's on its way should we continue this perilous path of, you know, eating garbage food from the main system and buying a bunch of plastic coming from China and, you know, for Christmas in the name of baby Jesus. I mean, it's all just insane, right? And so the sooner we can turn that around with our own personal decisions, the sooner we can shift our relationship with the world via consumption and conscious consumption, yes, the better, right? So let's just say, I mean, I got three tiers here. One is, let's just say someone's watching this and says, Eugene's my hero. I want to get out there and start becoming an urban ag person. What do I do?
First thing I would say is, you know, obviously you're watching this online. So I'd say you're most likely on Facebook. Go to Facebook. Look at Grow Where You Are on Facebook. That's the site that I manage, and there's plenty of information, and I try to put things up from all the connections that I've been able to gain worldwide and definitely nationwide. So depending on where you are, hopefully we can plug you in. You can also contact me through Grow Where You Are. I have a book, and I meant to grab it and have it here when we were going to film, because I got you in the middle in the book, Pedram, planting some food over at Ariel's. But I would say the other thing to do is to immediately just go into the kitchen and look at what your choices already are. Because one of the things that the film Origins really helps make clear is how powerful our choices are. So go in and look at the choices you've already started to make. You know, as they talk about, like, if you go into the supermarket, you really want to shop from the edges. You know what I mean? You really want to avoid the middle and either be shopping at the produce, just around the periphery of the store where things are actually living, you know? So look at those choices, and then from that, start to look at where you are in that moment. The reason I named the book Grow Where You Are, the reason why my business is Grow Where You Are, because it's about starting from that point. Yeah, you could come visit me in Atlanta and we could hook you up with a lot of different things, but most importantly, you could look at where you are right now and say, do I have a yard? Can I plant a fruit tree? Can I plant a garden? Maybe I don't have a yard. Can I grow some herbs in a box in my apartment or in my dorm room or whatever? Can I go online and research community gardens in my area and see where I can go and volunteer and help? Because service is one of the most key things about the agricultural movement, is that we get into the habit of growing more than we can consume. There's a recording artist called the Polish Ambassador, and he's going around, he's like an electronic recording artist, and he's going around on tour, and the permaculture action group has been traveling with him, and each city he goes to setting up permaculture action days after the concert and advertising them at the concert, which is great. So they invited us to be there, and we set up there at the concert, and I was talking to my partner and asking her, what do you think I should ask? Because whenever I go on stage and talk to people, I like to start with a question. So what do you think I should ask? I'm looking for a question. She said, why don't you ask them whether who in the audience has grown more food than they've produced, grown more food than they've consumed, produced more than they've consumed. So we need to start moving into being producers, right? The other thing is, if we start to shop at farmers markets and have interaction with local growers, and you get a piece of fruit that you really love, save that seed. Get in the habit of saving those seeds, and then get yourself some pots. Maybe you're not in a house yet where you can plant a fruit tree, but you can get a pot and start these seeds. So in a year or 2 years, they're a nice seedling of a tree, and you can start giving seedlings as gifts to friends and family members who do have homes, right? Who do own property, and say, hey, this is a plum. This is an avocado I got at the farmer's market. This is an organic apple. This is an organic grapefruit, an organic apricot. You feel what I mean?
Oh, man.
Any of these things are ways to start. Any of these things are ways to start.
That's fantastic. I love that idea. I have 2 pomegranate trees in our yard that my father gave us as like a starter gift for the garden. It's like, you know, what do you do with that? I mean, it's just that fruit is the most precious thing ever. My grandfather has given us an avocado tree. And it's just like your family's like legacy is growing in your yard. And so, yeah, one of the greatest gifts ever is to give the gift of life. I think that's really powerful, and I encourage people to do that. So now on the other end of that, what if you're like, I'm the busiest mom with 6 kids, you know, banging around trying to get to soccer games and all this kind of stuff, or, you know, I'm a doctor, lawyer, engineer, and I barely have enough time to come home and, you know, eat with my family. How do you interface with, say, local growers, CSAs, farmers markets, and the likes to at least be hooked into the clean, good food system? You know,
I think that's a wonderful question. There's a young woman named Afia who has a website called natural.com. It's NATTRAL.com. And she's a nutritionist. She's also somewhat of like a celebrity in the young urban movement, because her husband is a brother named Stick, who's a rapper from a group called Dead Prez. And he has kind of shifted his focus towards being healthy, being drug-free, eating organic, being a vegan. He's a bodybuilder. He has the RBG Fit Club, so he's all into lifting and doing that. And what they promote is the lifestyle of being a young, busy, urban, professional couple, family. And how do you do that? And so they give you Afia in particular gives you real practical solutions on not only recipes that you can use. The recipes are really where it's going to start, especially for the mother, for example, right? The mother is going to start by, oh, look, here's all these vegetarian or vegan recipes that taste great, that get my family excited, and that also require that I have the best ingredients to make them. So now I have to find out, where is the farmer's market? Where is the market that does local produce? Have to start doing that. And hopefully, if you get into a CSA, the community supported agriculture piece, where you have a box or a bag or a basket that you get weekly or monthly, you get excited enough to say, all right, similar to the water question that you asked, Pedram, A doctor, lawyer, engineer who's busy is busy because they're successful. You know, they say you want something done, you give it to the busy man, because the busy man is the person who gets things done. So you go to the successful person, you say, look, this is really about adding value to your life. And as you know more than anybody, value requires value. You want a car that you can get in every day and get to work safely and soundly, and you know that your wife and your children are moving around while you're at work and you feel confident. You had to spend the right money to get that vehicle so that you can move in confidence away from the family and know that they're taken care of. So we say to that young professional, once they have a CSA and they've had that CSA for a year or 6 months, and you're satisfied, and then you talk to them now about the next level of investment. And we really get into that investment piece. I know for myself, my LLC, Grow Where You Are, can do so much more with the proper investment. Mm-hmm. We're already making $1 out of 15 cents. You know what I mean? We're already making things happen at a level that is unparalleled. We're seeding new businesses. We are publishing. We're doing workshops and trainings and educational series, interfacing with restaurants. Now, when somebody who has that food at the restaurant is told that this food is grown in this neighborhood by these people and the story gets developed, then we have to be ready to receive investment, because we're automatically adding so much value to people's lives. So when you talk about symbiotic capitalism, to me, it makes, what else are we supposed to be doing? You know what I mean? We have got to figure out a way to have passive income streams coming in and supporting the experts in our fields and in our communities without it having to trickle through all these other channels where it gets stepped on and eaten up and whittled away. Why not have it be an immediate thing where somebody can watch you, see our conversation, and say, I want to invest in that. And how hard is it for you to invest some money? Especially if the focus for 20 years has been making money, then there's some money there.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's money there.
And the sad part is a lot of people are investing in these pensions and these 401ks and these plans. And if you actually look at where that money is getting invested, it's directly into the same companies that are paying lobbyists to convince our elected officials to vote against our best interest. And so
pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's all just big pharma, big food, big chem, oil, all that kind of garbage, right? And so it's just, if you look at where your investment dollars are going, that's a whole other conversation that I'd love to, have maybe even on this summit, is how green investment is going to change the world. So here's my part right now, because we're running out of time, is we're going to take a percentage of the proceeds of all the success kits that are sold. So if you like what's happening in this summit, please buy the recordings and the success kit, because a percentage of those proceeds are getting reinvested in the movements that we like. And I would love to say that we're going to use those funds to invest more into what you're doing, because man, you're doing it. And I am much happier putting my money into guys like you than people that are poisoning my children and just expecting us to keep doing it. So man, I know you mentioned the Facebook page. Is that the best place for people to find you?
Well, no, I mean, there's always so many places, but yeah, Grow Where You Are on Facebook is good. My very general website is gebsite.com, Gebsite, gebsite.com. Geb is the spirit of the earth in Egyptian mythology, so that's where Geb comes from. That's probably the best place right now to start. You go to those two, you got a whole lot of connections just from there, because from there you'll get the Agroecology Center. You can see some of the work. But on Gebsite, if you go to the media page, it has a lot of different videos and things like that. So that's probably the best way to start right now.
Fantastic. Well, absolutely. Man, I'm so honored to call you my friend. I love all of our interactions. I'd like to invite you out to California. We'll do some local farming and gardening, and I'm gonna put cameras on you for years to come. So I'd love to just kind of follow your story and help you help more people. I think that we need more Eugene Cookes in this world, and I just want to thank you for what you do.
Thank you, brother. It's a blessing. It's a pleasure and a blessing. That's how blessing came out. So I'm going to be in California probably the end of November. So I'll look you up and let's see what we can do. It'll be probably a non-work engagement, but just seeing family and checking on fruit trees that I planted 20 years ago. So let's do it.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Eugene Cooke, love this guy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Pedram.